Welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tiger podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. My name is Mark Gorash. I am here with Free Press beat writer Evan Petzold. We've just completed just a tragic month of baseball that saw you traverse the country, lots of places, lots of fun, but not much baseball fun. How you feeling today?
Mark, this is a really bad baseball team. I'm just going to come right out and say it. This is a bad baseball team. All right. It's a 2-5 record this week, 1-2 against the Philadelphia Phillies at Comerica Park, 1-4 against the Los Angeles Angels at Angel Stadium, 7-16 in the past 23 games, a June record of 10-16 after a May record of 11-16. The Tigers have a 33-45 record since their 5-0 start to the season, which is a 68-win pace over a full 162-game season. It's pretty miserable right now. And like we were saying last week, the summer's just getting started and the Tigers are in a really bad spot. Seemingly, it's only going to get worse. And it's going to be a long summer of losing baseball, but trying to make the most of it, of course.
Well, they have the 26th worst record in baseball since their 0-5 start. Not much to say about that. I think the question we need to start asking ourselves is, what do they do about it? I mean, what do they do about it?
Mark, there's nothing to do. Like, go look up and down the American League Central, right? Like, get the Cleveland Guardians at 52-30. That's the third most wins in the AL, behind only the Yankees and the Orioles. Steven Kwan, he leads MLB with a 368 batting average. Jose Ramirez has 23 homers. Josh Naylor has 20 homers. Then you got the Minnesota Twins. They're at 47-37. They had a 6-12 record to start the season. Since then, they're 41-25, dating back to April 20th. Carlos Correa, who Tigers fans, we know Tigers fans love Carlos Correa. He's hitting .425 with a 1.129 OPS in 22 games since June 6th. Also, he's hitting .311 in 65 games this season. Also, by the way, Carlos Correa on the season, a 148 WRC plus and worth 2.9 FWAR. Imagine if the Tigers were getting that kind of production out of their shortstops. Tigers shortstop production, 36 WRC plus minus 3.2 FWAR. Then you get the Kansas City Royals at 47-39. They have a 1.5 game lead on the final wildcard spot right now, ahead of the Boston Red Sox, Houston Astros, Tampa Bay Rays. I still don't think their bullpen is good enough, but I also think they're going to be buyers at the trade deadline. And then you got the Tigers at 38-46, and the Chicago White Sox at 24-62. How does it get any better? What do you do? There's no way to make this any better. Like, it's going downhill. They're going to have to trade away their pieces. It's a situation where, again, we've talked about this before, this offense is really bad. This offense is really bad, and therefore it's a bad baseball team. And they're not going to make the offense better overnight. There's nobody they can call up to make this team any better. And this is something we can get into a little bit later on the podcast, but what do you look forward to in the second half? I'm not so sure. It might have just been a failed offseason that turned into a bad season.
Well, when you talk about failed off seasons, it gives us the perfect transition to question one of the big two. The first half of the season is officially in the books. How do we evaluate the first half performances of Scott Harris's off-season additions? So let's talk about Mark Canha. Jumped out of the gate really well in the month of April. Since the 1st of May, he's got 1 home run and close to 200 at-bats. It's been kind of tragic. He's also been forced to play first base based upon the struggles of Spencer Torkelson. Does have a hip injury, seems to be willing to play over it. Talk to me a little bit about Mark Canha.
Yeah, let's go back to when the Tigers acquired him. It was November 4th, traded for Mark Canha. They gave up minor league reliever Blake Holub. And then the Tigers picked up Mark Canha's $11.5 million club option. Going back to that day, Scott Harris talked about Mark Canha being an on-base machine, has a plan, grinds out at-bats, never gives in to pitches, makes a ton of contact, immediately makes the team better. Scott Harris said, quote, "I think adding this type of bat with this caliber of approach at the plate can only help the young players. I hope many of our young hitters emulate this type of approach when they see it every day," end quote. Now, Mark Canha hasn't been able to do what he's done in the past. He's hitting .228 with a .679 OPS in 77 games. His .335 on base percentage is the worst it's been since 2018. His OPS hasn't been this low since 2017. Now, he has been the saving grace at first base in Spencer Torkelson's June 3rd demotion. But at the same time, if you go back to May 1st, he's hitting 199. Like, he's hitting 199 with a .539 OPS in 48 games since May 1st. That's just not good enough, and it's not getting the job done. But Mark, with each of these guys, I want you to put on your fan/evaluator/ wannabe GM cap, right? And tell me, like, is this a good deal? Was this a bad deal? Was this a whatever deal? Because, Mark Canha is just Mark Canha. Like, what are your thoughts here?
First of all, obviously Mark Canha is not healthy. I mean, holy smokes. And in June, he hit 186. He slashed 186, 287, 221 for a 53 WRC plus with no homers, 8 runs batted in, not striking out. He had an .035 ISO, which means he just has no power. I mean, Mark Canha can be bad. Let's be really honest about it. I mean, the Mets pretty much gave him away to the Brewers. The Brewers donated him to the Tigers. It wasn't like other teams didn't see some of the downside in a 34, now 35-year-old Mark Canha. The question becomes, really, when you evaluate the Mark Canha deal, is what else could they have done? And the answer is they could have done a few things. Mostly what everybody was clamoring for, what Evan Petzold was open-minded to, what Mark Gorash definitely wanted to consider, was signing J.D. Martinez.
I was not as open-minded as you were on this. I was on the Justin Henry Malloy train, let's not forget. But yes, you were all over J.D.
Yeah, I'm waiting for Justin Henry Malloy to get on the Justin Henry Malloy train himself.
I'm right there with you.
Okay. Considering for the month of June, he hit 175 in his recall. He did walk 9.6% of the time, but, he also had a 623 OPS and a 79 WRC plus. Maybe we shouldn't have expected that much more from his first month in the major leagues, but he did a couple things, hit a few dongs, flashed a couple of times, played the field one time. So my answer is yes. I think obviously in retrospect, J.D. Martinez might have been a good idea. Even pairing him with Mark Canha would have been a good idea, because I think the theme of the Scott Harris offseason was really didn't prepare for much to go wrong, did he? So, let's get into some other
let's jump into the second one, like right off the bat. Kenta Maeda, right? November 28th, signs a 2-year, $24 million contract with the Tigers, making $14 million in 2024 and then $10 million in 2025. Scott Harris talked about him being a veteran presence to win games and influence young starters, plus strike thrower, multiple swing and miss secondary pitches, excellent competitor, great teammate, does a lot of things that the young starters can kind of like watch, pick up, and add to their game. Here's the quote from Scott Harris. Quote, "If you look at our young rotation, we have a lot of stuff in the rotation. Now I hope we can unlock our command. Watching Kenta work every day, I hope our young starters notice that command, sequencing, and using the whole strike zone can really allow your entire mix to play up," end quote. Now, the performance for Kenta Maeda so far, it's not good. It's a 5.76 ERA, 19 walks, 45 strikeouts. It's across 59 and 1/3 innings and 14 starts. He has a 4.78 expected ERA. So it's not like he's been unlucky. He's just been bad. His 22% whiff rate is the worst of his career. His 18% strikeout rate is the worst of his career. He's not throwing a ton of pitches in the strike zone. He's down from the big league average. He needs to throw more strikes, but more importantly, he needs to miss more bats. He had a 5.96 ERA in March and April, a 6.62 ERA in May, and then now in June, a 4.74 ERA. So it was bad, worse, and then a little bit better, but still not great. He's just not striking guys out. He's not missing bats. So Mark, again, putting on your fan evaluator, wannabe GM cap, like, is this a miss? Is this a miss by Scott Harris? We were both on board with this. Let's not forget back in the offseason, but so far it seems like this has been a really big miss, and $24 million over 2 years. That's not chump change.
Well, to be very fair, because we always own up to what we do, and we're probably willing to talk to the beat writers about it if they want to talk to us about it, unlike the Popo of the Detroit Tigers. But I will say that, yes, we did not find the Kenta Maeda signing that onerous. At the same time, he was about sixth on the list of starting pitchers that we had interest in. I will repeat, as I always like to repeat, that the favorite of Evan Petzold in the past offseason was one Shota Imanaga, who has been not great in June, but aside from one massively poor start, but has been a revelation for the Chicago Cubs. At the top of my list to sign was Reynaldo Lopez, who has been extremely good for the Braves. They did convert him back to starting. I wanted him to be a closer, and that would have not been a bad thing. There were numerous other starting pitchers we liked, among them Luis Severino, who's been very good for the Mets, and quite a few others that we discussed. Kenta Maeda, not near the top of the list. So going to have to mark this one down as a massive mistake. And it brings us to left-hand reliever Andrew Chafin next on the list. Chafe pretty good in the month of April, tragically bad in the month of May, and shockingly not terrible in the month of June. Has been picking it up somewhat lately. Still kind of a wild card when he does stroll in. Struggling with command. What's your thoughts on Andrew Chafin?
Yeah, so he signed on December 12th, 2023. It was a 1-year, $4.25 million contract. It includes a $6.5 million club option for 2025. Back when that happened, Scott Harris talked about Andrew Chafin choosing to be a Tiger, and obviously the Tigers wanting players who want to pitch in Detroit to sign up and come pitch in Detroit. Now, side note, Andrew Chafin did come to Detroit for family reasons. It was to get closer to his family in Ohio, but the Tigers kind of played it like it was because of the player upgrades. That wasn't really the case. But anyway, that was just a side note. Anyway, Scott Harris talked about, Andrew Chafin strengthening the bullpen, being another reliever for AJ Hinch's matchup game, freeing up fellow left-handed reliever Tyler Holton to be used in a variety of ways. It's interesting because when you look at what Andrew Chafin has done, it's a 4.05 ERA this season. Batting average on balls in play, it's 378. League average is 296. He's been pretty unlucky this season. That's also, proven by his, 3.09 expected ERA compared to his 4.05 actual ERA. So pretty unlucky. I think Andrew Chafin has actually been pretty solid for the Tigers. He ranks 90th in the 90th percentile in whiff rate, ranks in the 84th percentile in strikeout rate. Slider has a 52% whiff rate. Like, if you look at the entire Tigers bullpen minus Alex Lang, because he was A, optioned to AAA Toledo, and then B, suffered an injury, nobody misses bats in this bullpen. And so if Andrew Chafin is doing that, like if he's got the whiff rate at 32%, the strikeout rate at 28%, like that's good for me. The biggest difference, though, between the 2022 version of Chafin and the 2024 version of Chafin is the ground ball rate. It was a 53% ground ball rate in 2022. Now it's a 39% ground ball rate in 2024. That's why the batting average on balls in play has been higher, because it's been more line drives, more fly balls, as opposed to the ground balls that he's typically used to getting with the sinker slider mix that he has. So if Andrew Chafin wants to get back to having, better actual numbers and not just having good expected numbers, probably needs to get the ball on the ground a little bit more. But other than that, I think he's been fine and a little bit unlucky. Hopefully he gets better results over the second half of the season. That takes us in, Mark, to right-hander Jack Flaherty, who signed December 20th, 1-year, $14 million contract with the Tigers. Scott Harris talked about Flaherty betting on himself with the 1-year contract, so the Tigers needed to create an environment that's going to bring out the best in him. Scott Harris did mention recapturing the fastball that he had early in his career would be the biggest key to a career revival for Flaherty. Mentioned the extraordinary talent that Flaherty has. Everybody knows that. It's just about getting it out of him. The performance has been outstanding. This has been incredible. Hat tip to Scott Harris. Hat tip to Jack Flaherty. Hat tip to Chris Fetter, Robin Lund, Juan Nieves, the pitching department in Detroit. It's a 3.24 ERA, 14 walks, 115 strikeouts in 89 innings and 15 starts. He had the back injection, not as many innings since then, but the performance has still been really good. That back injection happened between his June 4th and his June 15th starts. Anyway, though, the Tigers told him to scrap the cutter. The cutter was a problem for him because the way he was throwing it, it had effect on the way his fastball was moving, just based on the way his hand was coming through the ball in the cutter. So getting rid of the cutter, reallocating those pitches to the fastball and the slider, that helped the fastball play better. And then in turn, it's helped the slider play better. He's missing way more bats with both of those pitches. They also worked the way his body's moving down the mound, activating the glutes and the hamstring muscles rather than using the quad muscles. He also tweaked the grip on his slider. Like, this has been an amazing season from Jack Flaherty. I think the Tigers deserve a lot of credit. And I bet you Jack Flaherty probably feels like he's going to get paid in free agency this upcoming offseason. Again, that's why he went out and signed the 1-year deal. Let's not forget, he doesn't turn 29 until October 15th. Mark, you got to love this signing, right? You got to love the signing. You got to love the production. You got to love what went on behind the scenes. I think the Tigers have done a good job of showing that they're able to find starting pitchers and optimize them. Okay, we saw it with Michael Lorenzen, and that was kind of like the light version of this, and now we're seeing the for real version of going out and finding a real dude and making him great.
Have to say this is Scott Harris, in my mind, his only win. They've done a great job with him. The back, a little concerning, probably not quite the trade value that fans like to think he has. He does have plenty of trade value, don't get me wrong. Started to give up some homers, especially on fastballs lately. Fastball velo probably down over a mile an hour since the back injury. Hopefully, over time, he'll get some healing. The shot will kick in even more. He'll regain some velo. He's been a revelation. At his best, he was an all-star. So, got to tip your hat to Scott Harris on this one. Maybe the only one you tip your hat to Scott Harris on. So,
well, let's crank through these next two, Mark. We got right-handed reliever Shelby Miller, who on December 22nd, he signed a 1-year, $3 million contract, which includes a $4.25 million club option for 2025. Scott Harris came out and said that he's got the stuff to pitch at the very back of the bullpen, versatile enough to cover multiple innings, can do whatever AJ Hinch needs. Pitch mix is different than the other pitch mixes in the bullpen because of his splitter, which also creates more in-game matchup opportunities because he can take down righties and lefties with that splitter. The performance for Shelby Miller, again, has not been great, right? It's a 6.23 ERA, 7 walks, 25 strikeouts across 26 innings in 24 relief appearances, 7 scoreless innings in 5 games to start his season. Since then, he's allowed 18 earned runs over 19 innings in 19 games. That dates back to April 13th. He allowed 8 runs in 2 games in this recent 4-game series against the Angels. He's leaving way too many pitches over the heart of the plate. Those pitches are getting hit for damage. He single-handedly lost 2 games in the last 2 weeks, almost single-handedly lost 3 games during that stretch. Flitter isn't missing as many bats as it did last season. It's getting hit more often. Most of the damage coming off the fastball and the slider. Again, just too many pitches over the heart of the plate. Mark, is this a miss by Scott Harris? I mean, again, I know Shelby Miller had that great year with the Dodgers, but he hasn't been able to do the same here in Detroit.
First 7 outings, unscored upon. Obviously started getting some elbow pain, some nerve pain. Since then, he's a tragedy. On the other hand, Shelby Miller had one good season since 2016. Maybe we shouldn't be so shocked about it. Obviously, a tragic miss. I think I mentioned yesterday, you went through the numbers. I could see a team like the Dodgers, if they make a deal for Jack Flaherty, would consider asking for Shelby Miller back. They seem to have the Shelby Miller magic. I can't imagine anyone else in baseball would be too inclined to even consider Shelby Miller. And if things don't turn around here pretty quickly, and there's no buyers at the trade deadline for Shelby Miller, well, he'll be lucky to finish the season as a Tiger. Probably ends up on the DL. All right, let's move on to third baseman Gio Urshela. Talk to me about Gio. Been pretty good until about the last 14 days plus. Really, really struggling. And believe it or not quite as good in defensive metrics. So let's talk about Gio.
Yeah, finally wrapping up this segment, right? Just because we have, like 6 players to go through. There's actually a lot of offseason additions, which is kind of fascinating. But regardless, signed a 1-year, $1.5 million contract with the Tigers. That was in February 22nd. So that was during spring training. Scott Harris talks about him making a lot of contact, hitting the ball hard, playing above average defense at third base. Performance, like you mentioned, it's been really bad recently, and that's sunk his overall season numbers. He's hitting .241 with 2 home runs and a .586 OPS in 57 games. Batting average is the worst since 2017. OPS is worst since 2017. -3 defensive run saved, but he's been good based on the eye test there at third base. He's been solid. But average exit velocity, that ranks in the 6th percentile across all MLB hitters at 85.4 miles an hour. So he doesn't hit the ball hard at all. The only 2 homers he has are over the Green Monster in Boston. Only 4 of his 45 hits reach the warning track and beyond, which includes those 2 home runs. Since June 1st, he's hitting .209 with a .526 OPS in 24 games. It's been a rough go of things for Gio Urshela, but he does make a lot of contact. Hopefully, ball and play can help him turn his season around. But so far, it's slipping downhill pretty fast.
Let's sum up Gio Urshela. Couldn't start the predominant amount of games at third base for any other team except the Detroit Tigers. And really, it's not much to say. I mean, he was kind of pesky in the first 8 weeks of the season. He's been less than pesky this month of June, kind of powerless, not really bringing too much to the plate. And what they're going to do at third base, we'll kind of talk about maybe in a later segment. Bottom line is, not a very good report card for one Pobo Scott Harris. It's the kind of report card when you're discussing calculated risk and building a team. Numerous old players, nobody really performed besides Flaherty, maybe a little bit Chafin, not too much to get in trade value besides Flaherty, and borderline a disaster. I mean, I'd have to give the guy maybe a C- solely based on Flaherty, and it's an E based on everybody he signed, not including Jack Flaherty. And it's been part of my anger and rage over the course of the last 6 weeks because, let's be honest, talk's cheap. Your resume is your resume, and it's a bad resume so far. And it wasn't great last year. So that's my 2 cents. What do you got?
No, yeah, I mean, it hasn't been great so far, but let's save your rage for later, Mark. Let's save that for maybe our third segment, because we got our second segment coming up. We need to take a break, and then we have special guest Mike Ferrin from MLB Network Radio coming on to talk a little bit about the Tigers, their offseason, maybe what he would have done differently, Tarek Skubal, the rest of the AL Central. We'll talk about it, but first, we'll take a break. All right, I'd like to welcome Mike Ferrin, co-host of Power Alley on MLB Network Radio, to the Days of Roar podcast. I think this is for the third time since we've been doing this podcast, I think. Mike, thanks for joining us. It's always great to have you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy July. It's hard to believe we're halfway through the season now, right?
It's been an interesting season too, Mike. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I guess I've struggled to try and come up with a word to describe this year. There certainly are some unique data points, right? Like trying to figure out what exactly is happening. I mean, we have a down offensive year, which is not that dissimilar to what we had 2 seasons ago. We have some teams that I don't think we anticipated having the starts to the year that they have in Cleveland and Milwaukee. And I think because of that, we leave ourselves open, if we are still skeptics, to some pretty exciting comebacks in divisions potentially. So yeah, it's been a tough, I don't know if interesting is the word that I would use, but it certainly has been a year that it feels like it's been difficult to wrap your arms around what's happened in baseball.
Well, you got some performances with, Gunnar Henderson in the last 2 months of Aaron Judge that are kind of off the charts. And normally when you see the lack of hitting that you see this year overall, you start wondering a little bit about the baseball. But at the same time, with the home run, prowess of both Henderson and Judge, it's hard to say the baseball maybe isn't flying as much. So you kind of have to defer to how great pitching is in the major leagues this year. So that's obviously a big part of what's going on right now.
Well, I think it is. I mean, I think it's listen, we're seeing fewer and fewer fastballs thrown, right? When guys are throwing fastballs, they're using them 3 different ways, right? I mean, I think The Athletic did a really good piece in kind of looking at some of these offensive issues. I don't know that we can say that the ball is any different than it was maybe 2 years ago, but it certainly seems like there are a number of balls that have historically carried out of the ballpark, or at least in more recent history have, that aren't based on the way that they've been hit. And even in those, down offensive years across the board, you will find outlier performances, right? That's part of baseball. And so now it's tough to I guess I don't know if it's tougher, it's easier to call superstar players outlier performances outliers, but Gunnar Henderson and Aaron Judge are outliers to begin with, right? Like those are 2 of the best players in the game. Henderson's got a chance to be just the second player in history to be a 50-homer shortstop, which is pretty incredible. But, again, like it's just a matter of, we're in this kind of strange time where we seem to be fluctuating year to year on where offense is coming from. Last year was a little bit more balanced. The home run rate really spiked. Now it's back down a bunch this season, closer to where it was in 22, but 22 was way down from 21, and nothing will ever be 2019. 2019 is the 1987 of this generation. So, there's a lot to try and figure out. I don't think we have all the answers yet, but yeah, pitching is really good. The thing is that hitters have never been better either. It's just that pitching is always ahead of the hitting, right? So,
Mike, what stands out to you now that we're talking just about what's going on across the league? Like, what stands out about what the Cleveland Guardians and Milwaukee Brewers are doing? Because it seems like they're two teams with similar styles of play who are winning a lot of games. And it seems like they're teams that, and I understand like Cleveland's gotten some more power out of guys like Josh Naylor, Jose Ramirez. But these two teams, they seem like teams that just move the ball forward. They just put the ball in play and they run the bases really well. And they kind of create some havoc out there. Is that a style of play that works for these mid-market teams? Is that maybe a way that the Tigers should try to play into? Like, they don't really have a lot of guys that do that, but is that a way that they should be going? Like, is the game trending that direction, or are these like outlier situations where these teams are just really good at doing those things and they're cashing it?
Yeah. I mean, I think to say that that's the way Milwaukee's offense works is probably only about half true. They actually strike out a fair amount as a team. They're kind of more high middle of the pack in that, certainly than Cleveland does. And they have a little bit more power in the middle of the lineup, right? Adames, Hoskins certainly provide that. Joey Ortiz has actually been terrific as a rookie. I think he's been really overlooked. I mean, he's put together an all-star caliber year. He was the key piece in the Corbin Burns deal. So like they have had some big performances like that. And then they've got players like that are more contact oriented, to your point, like a Bryce Terang. Even I think, Yelich's power is back up a little bit this year, but it's just ticking a touch above average. He kind of is more in that mold. But I think they also have some young guys like Churio who haven't really clicked yet. I mean, which is to be expected. The guy really had no AAA time, and you've seen some flashes from him. So I think they're a little bit different. They have both. I think where they would be in common this season would be more on the fact that they run, and Milwaukee in particular really steals a lot of bases. I think both of them have exceptionally strong bullpens, albeit ones that have had a lot of appearances, and whether or not that's sustainable, I think that's going to be really interesting. And I think both have a reputation for developing good starting pitching, but neither team's starters have really been quite the same as what we've seen in the past, right? I mean, Tristan McKenzie getting optioned to AAA on the surface is really shocking for Cleveland, right? But he has not pitched well. Tanner Bybee is their best starter. They just got Gavin Williams back, who I think is an important arm for them going forward. Milwaukee is, gone are the days of Burns and Woodruff and Peralta. Woodruff is out for the season. Burns is, one of the leading Cy Young candidates in the American League in Baltimore. Freddie Peralta has been great, but they've run through an awful lot of starters and had to use openers and whatnot. So, I think kind of going back to one of the things I said earlier, I think it is fair to still view these teams even a half season in with at least a little bit of skepticism, or taking some of their performance with a grain of salt, because some of it feels like outliers. Now, at the same time, 2 years ago, we did the same thing with Cleveland, thinking, is this really going to work? And they rode that offense all the way to the postseason. Now, granted, they had better starters at that point, but I'm not entirely convinced that what we've seen is real at the top from them yet. I'd certainly like Milwaukee's offense a little bit better than I anticipated this year. I like Cleveland's a little bit better, but I mean, again, like something like 45% of their home runs are tied up in Naylor and Ramirez, right? Those are the two guys that are getting the ball out of the ballpark. So I'm really curious to see how it goes with them. And they have the benefit of playing in the Central, where, Kansas City, as well as they've played, they don't have a great offense, right? The Tigers' offense has not been good, although their starters have been very good overall this season. And the National League Central is just a hot mess, right? Like that's a division that I don't know how you make sense of. I mean, Pittsburgh and Cincinnati have some real young talent, but feel more 500-ish. The Cubs have been terrible, and you have more talent than what their record shows. And the Cardinals have been a surprise, right, on the positive side. So I think they benefit probably from their environment a little bit in the divisions that they play in. But I do think that I think they're better than we anticipated, but I'm still not sure. Like, check back with me at the 120 game mark, and I'll have a much better feel on it.
For sure. So pump the brakes, wait and see a little bit on those two teams. You mentioned the Tigers offense. I think you know where this is going. Mike, you said over and over and over again back in the offseason and even early in the season, right? Like the Tigers needed to do more to improve the offense in the offseason, either via trade or free agency. Turns out you knew exactly what you were talking about because this offense is pretty terrible. It seems like this year was a missed opportunity. I'm putting you on the spot, but like looking back on things, like what would you have done differently? I mean, hindsight, obviously always 2020, like of course. But like, what would have been the best path forward for this team considering the free agent pool? Like, is that a Matt Chapman? Is that a Cody Bellinger? Is that a JD Martinez? Is it getting creative with a trade? Like, how did you realize that this team was missing offense, and where do you think they could have done things differently?
Well, I think you just had to look at the roster to know that. And listen, I'll give them a little bit of a pass in that they didn't expect Kerry Carpenter to miss half the season to this point, right? And he's been one of their better offensive players. And when he was healthy, he was very good. But they went into the winter with the stated goal of not wanting to block their young players. And we have seen that the adjustment period for young players, and Colt Keith is a great example of this, is pretty steep. And when you have a pitching first team, you cannot count on health from pitching every single year. And they had a rotation that was ready to win now. And based on the performances of Tarik Skubal and Jack Flaherty and Reese Olson, I think you've certainly seen that. I mean, when Casey Mize is your fourth or fifth best starter, like you're doing pretty good. So I think that's where the disappointment stems from. As for what specific move they could have made, I mean, certainly in retrospect, it feels like JD Martinez would have been a really, really good fit. He has kept hitting in a difficult hitting environment in New York and been a big catalyst for them bouncing back after a miserable May. So yeah, that would have been a potential option. I think looking at the trade market is always something that makes sense. There weren't guys necessarily that were moved, and that can make it difficult. And it's where I might give the front office just a little bit of a pass, but it just didn't seem like whether it was specific names or just a general feel that they wanted to commit money to free agents. And that's why you ended up with, like Mark Canha is a good player. I like Mark Canha. And I think Gio Urshela is fine. I know the defensive metrics are split on him at third, but he's a nice player. But they're role players, and what they need was somebody to help carry the load. Now, did they think Spencer Torkelson was going to crash and burn in the first half? No, and they can't be faulted for that either. But at the same time, you had to look at that roster and go, man, it's going to be like you're wish casting a lot of things to go right to get to an average offense, a middle of the pack offense, and that just hasn't happened. I don't know if they were counting too much on Parker Meadows last month when he was really good, as opposed to the general feeling that he's more of a down lineup hitter with good defense and center. I don't know exactly what it was that they were counting on for internal improvements, but it does feel like a missed opportunity because of the division they play in and because of how good their pitching is and because there's no guarantee that their pitching next year will be this healthy.
All right, so let's get to the elephant in the room. We're coming up on the trade deadline sooner than we think. Tigers have two premium starters in Jack Flaherty and Tarik Skubal. There's going to be a lot of questions about Skubal. It's, to us, again, the elephant in the room. What are your thoughts about both of those? And should the Tigers actually consider moving Skubal based upon the circumstances?
I'm not in favor of moving Skubal. I mean, I think your goal is to win at some point, right? And you're not going to replace him. There's just not who are you going to get that down the road that's going to replace him in the rotation? You don't have anybody, right? Your top pitching prospect has been hurt every single season that he's played, right? And Jackson Jobe is really good. And to say that he's going to end up with a ceiling like Skubal is wish casting. I don't think that you find another player like that. I would be trying to extend him at some point versus trying to trade him. I think that that's a mistake because it just continues to feed into this cycle that's followed the Tigers for a decade now. So I'm not as interested in that. What I would talk about is just about any other pitcher that's not nailed down, right? I mean, Flaherty, I think, clearly is going to get you a decent return. He's affordable on a 1-year deal. All you have to do is beat what you would get for a qualifying offer in order to make the deal reasonable from the Tigers standpoint. It's not like the money is so great that no contending team would be able to take it on. And he certainly pitched much more like the Jack Flaherty we saw circa 2019 than the one we've seen the last couple of years. So I think Flaherty is one of the better trade chips that are available. I mean, outside of that, I would seriously consider talking about Jason Foley. Evan, I heard you talking a little bit about how there's a lack of bat missing on that team, and certainly that looks to be the case in that bullpen. But Foley is pretty unique in that he's an extreme ground ball guy, and he seems relatively split neutral. And I think he's a pitcher that a lot of teams would have interest in. And because there's years of control, there might be a chance to be able to acquire players that would be potential, fits in the lineup going forward. I mean, that's really what they need, are position players, because the young position players they have, there's not that depth there. So, I think he's a name. I know Shelby Miller's last 2 outings have been terrible, but he's still posting an above average strikeout rate and a well below average walk rate. And I'm sure somebody thinks that they would be able to fix him if he's available. And I would certainly think that he is, but the cost of acquisition wouldn't be very high. Chafin, gets lefties. The velocity's gone backwards. I think he'd be somebody that has interest. Mark Canha, probably as a platoon bat, would be someone that teams would have interest in. There are a couple of teams that could really use a third baseman. I live in Arizona. They've got no production on a third. Gio Urshela might be an upgrade for them. So like that's a possibility. But really, your biggest trade chip at this point is probably Flaherty, and everybody else is role players. And they just, like, whatever they move, you're unlikely, maybe outside of whatever the headliner piece is for Flaherty, and getting somebody that is hugely impactful, unless you're willing to talk about players with years of control left. And, I know that's why part of the Scooble discussion comes up, but man, when you have those elite level talents, it's really difficult. You just keep robbing Peter to pay Paul if you trade them for prospects, and that doesn't make much sense.
So, Mike, when it comes to Jack Flaherty, what kind of player should the Tigers be trying to get for him at the deadline? Like, is it just basically go find, single A, double A bats just to try to replenish the farm system in some way? And also, I have another question too, right? Like does last year's Erod mess, the Eduardo Rodriguez deal that fell through, does that impact the way that teams have been negotiating with the Tigers at this year's trade deadline at all? So what are you looking for in Flaherty, and does the Erod thing matter anymore?
No, I mean, I think that means that was more on, Eduardo Rodriguez had a no trade clause, right? So, I mean, that's not on the Tigers. That's on Eduardo Rodriguez to exercise his contractual rights. So I don't think that's something that ends up impacting him, especially with a player like, say, a Flaherty, who's going to be a free agent after the season. As to what they're targeting, I mean, it's, listen, I can sit here and say they should be targeting bats because I think that's what their system desperately needs. But if you go into it from an executive standpoint saying, hey, we need to target offense, then you're limiting your pool of return even further than just the number of teams that you're dealing with that are looking for a starting pitcher, say for Flaherty. So I don't think you can limit that. I mean, I think what you're probably looking at as a headliner is somebody in the back part of a top 100, somebody like, somebody in the 75 to 100 range or 70 to 100 range. And then maybe somebody just kind of off the list. Those would be, that would be similar, or I would think would be a reasonable return for Flaherty, or, you may want to try and get a flyer at a lower level. I mean, that certainly seems that executives are more willing to take risks as an extra piece in a deal on players that are maybe just reaching the domestic complexes or are in the Dominican Summer League, because there's a greater chance for upside with it, right? You can kind of steal a player in the deal. So I would think that that's going to be part of their focus on whatever a tertiary piece would be, just because most organizations seem to do that. But it's real hard to say exactly what. Plus, you need to know which teams are going to be interested in the end, right? And that's part of the issue we have with this trade deadline is I feel like maybe we have a little bit more clarity in the National League over the last week, but not much. And I think it could be another 3 weeks before we really have an idea of what the market looks like. And then, like if let's say the Orioles wanted to go back down the Flaherty road, well, targeting bats from the Orioles makes a ton of sense. If it's another organization that may be deeper in pitching, maybe you have to bite the bullet and say the best player we're going to get back is a pitcher, even though we know that that's not what our greatest need is as an org.
All right. So I'm going to ask the elephant in the room question. It's a little off script, but at what point in time, Tigers have been bad for 9 years? I mean, we don't need to relitigate the Avila era. I think it speaks for itself. But Scott Harris walked in, pretty pedigreed, head of baseball operations, worked for some great people. First 2 years, to be honest with you, aside from the top of last year's draft, not real good. So the question is, how long's the rope? When do you start looking at the resume of what's transpired and you try to separate, the talk of what he wanted to do from the execution of the strategy of what he's done? Is it short term or is it longer term, Mike?
I mean, I think it's a big mistake to start evaluating executives in like 12-month increments, especially when they're essentially telling you, we think we have a window, it just doesn't start this year, which is what their moves this winter said. So I think there's more pressure on them certainly going into next winter to improve the baseball team and have it be a better roster than what they've had the last couple of seasons. But I don't know that you could necessarily walk into it and be like, well, it's time. You have to win this year or he's out. I mean, generally speaking, 4 years at a minimum, 5 years probably more likely is a better way to evaluate an organization, especially one that had as many infrastructure challenges as the Tigers did before. And I think a lot of that, I'll use the Marlins as a current example of that, right? Like, for all of the talk about their major league roster and the failings of what they have accomplished or have not accomplished on the field this year, like they've spent a lot of time working as basically HR all offseason in trying to modernize the operation. And I do think that there is some of that in what Harris had to do with Detroit as well. So I think, there's only, and that's not a very fulfilling answer for fans. And I get it because it's far more binary, right? Wins and losses. But the reality is that there's only so much that anybody can do at a given time. And I think that their focus has been stretched, right? In trying to build an organization, not, I want to say from the bottom up, but certainly make it stronger and deeper and a little bit more modern. So I think that they need to see some more aggressive moves. I think they need to start flipping some Rule 5s to Rule 6s or find some Rule 6 players, some plus players to be able to add to the mix. I think they need to start finding some people to take a Little Caesars money to be able to come and help the offense. Like, I just think that there's a number of moves that need to be made this winter because the division is still going to be winnable, but it doesn't change the fact that it hurts that this feels like a missed opportunity based on everything that we saw, which was, hey, this pitching is ascendant and it looks like it's going to be healthy and pretty good. And it doesn't seem like they're going to have enough offense to finish the job this year. I mean, the fact that their record is as close to the Angels as it is, to me, is stunning. I mean, and I think a lot of it is because they just did not have offensive depth. And so now you're going to have to start trading from your system. You're going to have to start making deals that maybe you push in for a year more than you want to make it uncomfortable. We're going to find out a lot about Scott Harris as an executive when it comes to making those decisions as to whether or not he'll be as conservative as, some of the bosses that he's worked for have been when it comes to those deals.
Yeah, just to double down on that, like Scott Harris has a long contract here, in Detroit. AJ Hinch has a long contract here in Detroit. Scott Harris has had just one draft so far. So, he should not feel like he's on the hot seat whatsoever. I'm right there with you, Mike. But I think that's all we have for you today, man. Like, this has been really, really good. We appreciate your time, your insight into a variety of topics. We got to get you back during the postseason. We probably won't be talking a ton of Tigers in the postseason, but it'd be great to have you back and kind of talk about what's going on around the league at that time, because, all eyes are on the postseason once we get to October.
Right. Anytime. Happy to be on with you guys. Take care.
Thanks, Mikey.
Yeah, man, we appreciate it. Thanks. Everyone, that was Mike Faren, co-host of Power Alley on MLB Network Radio. One of the best radio guys in the business. He knows baseball like nobody else. There's more to discuss this week, but first, let's take a break.
All right, we're back. I hope you enjoyed Mike Ferrin. I think I said to Ev, Mike Ferrin is the Aaron Judge of baseball discussion. It just is amazing, the greatness and his ability to discuss any team, anytime, in depth, without doubt, the most knowledgeable baseball talker in the world, not even in America, in the world. Mike Ferrin. What a great guest. I hope you enjoyed him. All right, let's get back into the big two. Here we go. Question 2, the big 2. What is there to look forward to about the second half of the season? And are there any reasons for fans to be interested, excited, pay attention, or should we all be happy that Bally Sports isn't broadcasting Tiger games to their fandom on Comcast? All right, let's get into it. So we're coming up to the trade deadline. We know the Tigers are going to be sellers. Let's talk about it for a second because we're going to devote a whole show to it soon. So talk to me about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to fan interest, trade deadline probably right there at the top of the list of things to look forward to in the second half, because with where we're at right now, like it certainly isn't making the playoffs or making a postseason push. Like the Tigers would have to go on basically an improbable run to put themselves in a position to really make the playoffs. Like when you look at the fact that this is a team that's 15 games back in the American League Central Division. They're 8 games back for the last wild card spot. And again, they're 38-46. Like it's been a rough go of things for the Tigers this season, especially, since their 5-0 start to the year. It's been bad. So I would say if fans are looking forward to something to be excited about in Detroit, it's probably the fact that the rookies report for Lions training camp on July 20th, and then the veterans arrive on July 23rd to get into the training camp ahead of a new season with Super Bowl aspirations, with the Lions. But as for the Tigers, yeah, it's probably the trade deadline, like Jack Flaherty, Mark Canha, Carson Kelly, Gio Urshela, Shelby Miller, and Andrew Chafin. Both Miller and Chafin have club options. Keep that in mind. So yeah, I think it's looking at how those guys are performing over the next month of baseball, how the rest of the league is trending, and which teams could be potential fits for a guy like Jack Flaherty. Like again, he probably is at the top of a lot of teams' lists for starting pitchers to go out and get. I think he's probably one of the most realistic guys to go out and get just because he's on that 1-year deal. Like, yes, teams might say, oh yeah, Skubal would be great. Like, how awesome would it be to trade for Skubal? But is Skubal really going to be traded at the deadline? Like, probably not. Jack Flaherty, on the other hand, he's definitely going to be on the move. So I think watching for that is going to be interesting. Return of Kerry Carpenter. He's coming back from a lumbar spine stress fracture, probably in late July as a post-All-Star break return to the Tigers lineup. That'll be fun to watch to see if he can do what he did pre-injury. If he can do that post-injury, that's a huge boost to not only like the lineup this year, but also down the road into the future. Also looking forward to the return of Javier Baez because look, let's face it, like Ryan Kreidler, Zach McKinstry, they've been terrible offensively. Now, Ryan Kreidler, let's give him some credit. He's been a lot better defensively since his first week in the big leagues. I mean, that was an abysmal first week in the big leagues, but he's gotten a lot better defensively, but still, like Ryan Kreidler is not hitting. Zach McKinstry is not hitting. I understand Javi Baez doesn't hit, but at the same time, he's got good defense. He's also getting paid a ton of money. Don't you want to see a guy who's been a former, all-star in your lineup and see what he's got coming back from the rehab assignment? He's done a lot of his work in Tampa, done some work in Lakeland. He'll be starting a rehab assignment possibly this week and hoping to be back before the All-Star break. So we'll see if Javi Baez can return a better version of Javi Baez. That might be something fun to watch for. Maybe another chance for Parker Meadows. Maybe that's something that we can get excited about. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, again, this is a guy who's hitting fastballs in the AAA Toledo, but he's getting destroyed by breaking balls. I think he's forever going to be caught in between at the big league level until he can lay off some of those breaking balls that are forcing, that are really, forcing him to chase. Like he's getting into a lot of chase on the breaking balls. Sure, he's on fastballs, but got to be able to lay off those breaking balls and be on the fastballs at the big league level. Otherwise, you're going to be exposed. But it's an elite defender in center field. It makes the team better defensively when you talk about the outfield defense. So yeah, like maybe that's something to watch for. I think maybe too, like if Mark Canha is traded, what do the Tigers do at first base? If Mark Canha gets traded and if Gio Urshela gets traded and if Spencer Torkelson, who is struggling in AAA Toledo, isn't ready to come back, what do they do at the first base position? Do we finally see some reps for Colt Keith? I think that's a smart move. I think that's something they should do. Again, I don't really understand why the Tigers haven't given first base reps to guys like Kerry Carpenter and Justin Henry Malloy and now even Colt Keith over the years. I don't understand why they haven't done that because they don't have any first basemen. If it's not Torkelson, Gio Urshela, or Mark Canha and Gio Urshela could be gone at the trade deadline. Torkelson could still be stuck in AAA Toledo. In terms of prospects, like who are we really excited about? Jace Young, I don't think he's really coming up this year, to be honest. His defense at third base has been terrible. He also isn't hitting any velocity. So I don't think Jace Young is knocking on that door really at all at this point. And so if you're not excited about Jace Young and you know that, Jackson Jobe, as exciting as he is as a pitching prospect, he's not making his debut in 2024. He's making his debut in 2025 as is Jace Young, Justice Bigbie. Like, a lot of people were excited about him. He's kind of been just okay. So I don't know. What's there to be excited about? Not a whole lot. I mean, sure, maybe you're watching for the deadline. Maybe you're watching for Carpenter's return and Baez and maybe another look at Parker Meadows. But I don't know. Those things don't really get me that excited.
Wow. That was depressing. Do I have to show up for the podcast for the rest of the year after that discussion? I mean, holy smokes, that was depressing.
We don't miss a week, Mark. We don't miss a week, not even in the offseason. So,
all right. So let's discuss a few things on my list. Parker Meadows. I'm going to call out obvious service time suppression reasons. I mean, Akil Baddoo's hitting 118. Why is Akil Baddoo here? Seriously, why is Akil Baddoo in the major leagues? I mean, we had enough of that already. Come on. Why is Parker Meadows playing at Toledo? What's he going to learn there? I mean, he was very good the last month. He hit 295. He had 4 homers, 14 steals, 17 walks. Come on. I mean, it's time to see what he can do. Can he add something to the team? All right. As far as Gio Urshela playing third base, I get it. You got to put somebody at third base. And yes, he's calmly reliable defensively, even though the metrics don't love him. But, guess who's hitting 290 when he plays third base for the 31 games he's played at third base this year?
Put some respect on his name.
Matt Vierling. The same Matt Vierling that hit less than 200 this month after teasing everyone with the greatest single 30-day performance of his career. He reverted back to Matt Vierling. Ask me if I'm shocked. All right. The bottom line is, look, what is there to look forward to? I'm not so inclined to think that Jackson Jobe will not appear this year. I understand the service time issues, but at the same time, it's starting to be time to be realistic about Jackson Jobe. He's really, really, really good. He needs experience. At the same time, he can't seem to stay healthy. This is now 3 years into it. There's always some little nick or some weird injury he's getting. And the idea you're saving service time on a pitcher that's constantly hurt with massive upside seems foolish. Scott Harris is going to have to man up and start taking some risks. He can't keep pushing everything off. And that's what he does. He pushes everything off. He pushes off signing free agents. He pushes off making trades. He suppresses prospects. This has been 2 years of this. And it kind of leads me into a question that Evan Petzold likes to ask me all the time when we're talking about the Detroit Tigers, when we're not talking to you, which is, what's Scott Harris's strategy? What's his plan? Does he have a plan? I mean, I just detailed the plan he's implemented in the first 23 months of his tenure, which is nothing. He's implemented the nothing plan. Don't promote anyone. Don't trade for anyone. Don't sign anyone. Just 100% risk adverse. So what's the real plan? What's the plan about being good, Evan Petzold? You tell me.
We've talked about this time and time again on this podcast, and I think it's important to talk about it over and over and over again until we finally get some answers. Like, Scott Harris has an internal timeline, supposedly, right? Like, we think he does. He has his internal timeline. He knows what the projections say. Like, he's got it all planned out as to when he's going to, make his move and the competitive window is going to open. But that has not been communicated whatsoever, which leads me to believe maybe there isn't a plan. Maybe there is a plan. Who really knows? Are we just kind of like floating off in no man's land, wondering when this team is actually going to be good? Because if this team isn't going to be good now, when is it going to be good? Like, again, we talked about it. I've talked about 2026, 2027. Is that when Max Clark and Kevin McGonigal get here and, Riley Green is about to become a free agent and Kerry Carpenter is about to become a free agent and Colt Keith has a little bit more experience? Like, is that the core? Is that the foundation to finally build around? Is that when this team is going to be competitive? Like, I understand that, stamping a timeline on it might not be the smartest decision or the smartest way for Scott Harris to go about it, because then, boom, the clock starts ticking. And I get that. I understand that, maybe he's protecting himself in that way a little bit. Like that just kind of like makes sense, right? If you say, oh yeah, the plan is to be good and the plan is to win in 2025, and let's say the team is no good in 2025, well then that's considered a failure and you screwed up. Like you've made a mistake, right? So I understand that to an extent, but I think even a little bit of an understanding of like, hey, this is going to take some time. Like if he were to come out and say that, this is going to take some time. This might take a few years before the competitive window opens and we're able to get back into real compete mode where we can have a sustainable winner because of A, B, C, D, E, F, G reasons. Like that's a much different story than just not saying anything at all. So I think it's important to give fans something to look forward to. Like if it's not this year, I get it. If it's not next year, I get it. Like I'm willing to trust in the plan if I know there's a plan. I think that's maybe the standpoint that I'm coming at it from, if that makes some sense. And so far, like that hasn't really happened. And I understand that, who knows, like maybe Spencer Torkelson would have raked this year and maybe Kerry Carpenter would have stayed healthy and maybe Riley Green would have turned into a real MVP candidate or something like that. Maybe Colt Keith would have been a Rookie of the Year candidate. And maybe this offense would have been a lot better because, again, the offense was prepared for upside with all these players. It wasn't really banking on the fact that a lot of these guys could stumble. It was banking on these guys hitting their upside. And if that were to happen, the offense would have been good. The pitching would have been good. Outfield defense would have been good. Don't talk to me about the infield defense. It's terrible. The bullpen, sure, it's been shaky, but still, like you would have had a good offense and when you would have had a good starting rotation if the young hitters, would have rose to the occasion. And again, maybe the Tigers beat their internal timeline. Maybe they are ahead of time when it comes to their internal timeline. So I understand that like things can change in baseball so quickly, but it would be at least nice to know what the plan is if there is a plan. I believe Scott Harris has a plan. I do. I truly believe that he has a plan. But it's concerning that he hasn't been willing to share that plan, not even in the vagueness of, not even vaguely. And that causes me a little bit of concern when you consider the fact that it's 2024 and I have no idea where this thing is going.
I got a smile on my face because when you talked about Scott Harris has a plan, I truly believe that he does have a plan. What I was laughing about to myself was, it always reminds me of the infamous Mike Tyson quote. And the infamous Mike Tyson quote is, when he was knocking people out pretty much left and right every time he fought anyone early in his career, his comment was, everybody has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. And that's pretty much what I have to say to Scott Harris. Everybody has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. And guess what? In 2024, Scott Harris has been hit in the mouth. And pretty much, I get the feeling he's sitting in his office somewhere vacillating between, why is this all happening to me? Or, people just have to be patient. I have a plan. It's not working now, but it's going to work. And it all leads me to this question for you, Evan Petzel, before we get the heck out of here and start lighting off fireworks and cooking sausages, dogs, and burgers. Here's what I ask you. If at the All-Star break next year, 2025 looks a lot like 2024 did, is Scott Harris getting fired?
No way.
You don't think so, huh?
Absolutely no way. No,
so
not a chance.
You don't think if another season of abject failure, of disinteresting baseball, of being totally ignored and having no chance of being good or winning after 2.5 years of nothing, that they aren't going to start considering firing Scott Harris? Look, all I can tell you is, yes, Chris Ilitch was patient for 7 years. I promise you this, though. He's not going to be patient for 7 years this time.
I understand that, but Mark, you have to think, like, if the internal plan truly is like a 2026 or a 2027, then you're going to have to see that through. Like, Scott Harris isn't getting fired before Max Clark makes his big league debut. Let's just be honest here, all right? Like, no. I mean, that's his first draft. You got to see things pan out. Like, again, you have to see things pan out if that truly is the plan. But again, I'm in the boat of, like, let's talk about the plan. Like, what is the plan? Let's be honest about the plan. Let's let fans know what the plan is. I'm going to quote Colt Keith. When he was in the fall league, I went and talked to him and he said, quote, "I think that's a winner's mentality. say you're going to do it and then go do it, end quote. That's a quote from Colt Keith when he was like, 20 years old. All right. Talking about how he wanted to be great and he wants to be great in this game, right? I talked to him back in the fall league. That was November of 2022. And that's what he said. And so that's the challenge for Scott Harris, I think, is to say what you're going to do and then go out and do it. And so far we've heard about a lot of different pillars and a lot of different talking points, but I want to know when this team is playing to be good. And then I want to see that happen.
All right. Well, I don't want to, we've regurgitated the resume, but the bottom line is you can't lay out your plan 2 years after you're hired, A. And B, Scott, I've been saying this for a month. Look, end of the day, man up, talk to the beat writers, disclose the plan, face the tough questions, be the boss. If you can't do that, you're going to keep hearing from me that it's time to find somebody else who has the balls to succeed. You can't win being afraid of losing. I keep saying that. The great Chris Stapleton. Nobody wins afraid of losing. All right, it's time to get out of here, Evan Petzold. It's time to celebrate the 4th of July. It is one beautiful day today. So I'd like to remind everybody, please like, rate, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, you people know where to find us. And mostly, you can always find us embedded in the free next to every Evan Petzold article. You can actually find us a little bit in YouTube and YouTube Shorts. They'll give you some vignettes of what we discussed. Thanks to Mike Ferrin this week. I'd also like to thank press editor Nicole Avery Nichols, our producer, the man, Robin Chan, rescues us every time. I'd like to thank Savannah Petzold for taking good care of Evan Petzold this week. Hopefully I get to see my grandson soon. And to everybody, happy 4th of July and peace.